Hello everyone, I'm Dave Thomas, and today I am building the Lil Grunt. This is by Aerotech and their mid-power line they're now calling Enerjet. This is a new one for me. I have not actually built any of the Aerotech mid-power ones. Now Quest is also an Aerotech brand, and I've built lots of Quest ones. But this will be a new one, so this is the first of several videos that I'll be doing for this Enerjet line of rockets. So as we would do with any other one, we're going to open this up. Now, one of the unique things about these kits is that the box itself turns into a cradle. So if we look on the back here, these pop out and up to form a cradle that you can use by simply turning the box over. Now unfortunately in the packing process they've taped over some of those, so it may take a little bit of work to get those free. Alright, well, we'll go ahead and open this up here. Right. Now as usual we're going to want to check through our instruction sheet here. I'm going to move the box out of the way. Okay, so this actually descends on a big streamer, and that's right here. We've got a nose cone, and in a small parts package here we have the motor mount, the shock cord, launch lugs, centering rings. Okay, and like the Quest rockets, this also uses a hybrid shock cord system. So it'll have a Kevlar shock cord that mounts to the rocket itself, and then that gets connected to an elastic one here. Alright, we've also got our engine clip. Alright, this will use a 3/16 inch launch rod. Then we've got our body tube, fin stock, and finally some self-adhesive decals. So it looks like we have everything that's supposed to be here. I'm going to clear away most of this and we will get started. Our first task is to assemble the shock cord, and if you've built any of the Quest rockets, this is going to be really similar. So just go ahead and run each one out here. Now what's a little bit different is we're going to take both ends of the Kevlar here and bring them together. And then we're going to bring the elastic one here and tie it on. So we're going to have a big overhand knot here to tie all of those together. Which is easier said than done because the elastic wants to stretch and the Kevlar won't. Remember, we want to try and keep these all together here. There we go. Alright, so once you've got that, go ahead and pull the whole thing taut. Now that elastic's going to stretch more than the Kevlar will. Alright, we get everything tied down there. Okay, now I recommend putting on a little bit of wood glue or white glue to this to keep that knot from unraveling. And the Kevlar especially has kind of a slick surface to it, and it does not hold knots well. So if we give it a little help here, and we do want this excess here, and that'll keep it from backsliding through the knot. Okay, now when this goes in, this loop is going to be tied on to the motor mount, and then the rest of the shock cord here will eventually be tied on to the nose cone. Now before I go on to the motor mount, which is the next part in the instructions, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the fins and go ahead and prepare these because I'm going to use some sanding sealer on them, and it takes a little while for that to dry. So I can be building the motor mount while the fin is drying with the sanding sealer. So first, I'm going to leave them all in the fin stock. Now, if yours have If yours have come out of the fin stock, you can just do this to each fin. But I'm going to start with some 150 grit sandpaper, and I'm just going to sand all the faces here. Alright, once you've got everything smooth, then just take a hobby knife to cut away the little bits here that are holding them in place. Okay, so it looks like maybe their laser cutter didn't go quite all the way through the way it should. Now I'm going to stack these together and then take my 150 grit sandpaper once more, and now I'm just going to lay it down on the table here, and I'm just going to take the whole stack and draw the edges across. And then turn it to the next set of edges. Alright, and this is just going to get everything nice and even. Okay. Now, these are going to go on the rocket like this, so this is our leading edge. And I would recommend with this particular rocket to round the leading edge, but leave the other edges square. The reason for that is rounding the leading edge will improve the aerodynamics significantly more than just leaving it square. But leaving a square tip and trailing edge is going to make this a stronger fin. Since this does not use through-the-wall mounting, and it's a relatively heavy rocket for its size, but it's coming down on a streamer, these fins are probably going to take some significant impact force. And so we want to keep them strong, and if you do things like bevel the trailing edges here, those are much more likely to chip. So you can do it the way you like. That's the rationale for what I'm doing here. I'm going to come back to my sanding block and my 150 grit sandpaper here. And to round these, I'm just going to first of all knock down the edges on the leading edge here. And we want to frequently check this in cross section to make sure we're doing it evenly. Alright, and something to watch is when you do this, just because of the way we hold this and such, the middle tends to get sanded more than the edges. So also check the edge itself and make sure that it's even. Alright, once you've got those edges down, then just continue sanding and then roll your wrist over to impart a rounded surface there. And again, frequently check back to the cross section. Okay, we're pretty even, a little bit more on this side. Alright, and then you can see the edge here with a little bit of residue from the laser cutter. You can actually use that as a guide because when you're done, that will be gone. Alright, that looks pretty good there. The remaining little bit of brim there, I think is actually the wood grain rather than the cutter. I'll give it a little bit more just to be sure. Alright, so that's one fin. I'm going to do the same thing with the other two, but do it off camera, because who really likes to watch somebody sand fins? All three of my fins have now been shaped, and I'm going to move to some 220 grit sandpaper and just kind of sand everything now in preparation for the sanding sealer. So go ahead and do the faces. Okay, and then just run it over the forward edge there, the leading edge a little bit. And then each of the other edges. You can leave the root edge here fairly rough because this is what's going to get glued to the body tube anyway, and so a smooth surface is actually not as good for holding glue. So we do want it flat, and that's why we did it with the 150. But you really, you can sand this to 220 if you want, but there's really no need to. Alright, once again I'll do the same thing to the other two fins off camera and then come back. This next step is optional, but it's a way to give you a smoother surface on your fins. It also at least marginally strengthens the fins. So I've got some sanding sealer here, and I keep it in smaller jars so it doesn't dry out. You can get this in most areas that have paint, so paint stores, department stores, hardware stores. Also several rocketry retailers sell small versions, kind of like this, for around $3 to $5. A quart of this costs about $15 and is enough to probably last you half a lifetime. You're also going to need some corrugated cardboard here that can stand up. Now in this case, this is a quick and dirty rocket stand, but it's got the corrugations there. And then you're also going to need some pins, okay, preferably long, thin ones. These particular ones are dissecting pins, because if you hadn't realized by now, I'm a biologist. But you can also use dressmaker's pins or just general purpose sewing pins. And so what we're going to do here is, for the fins, we're going to take a pin and put it into the root edge here. Make sure it's straight and not coming out of either side there, and push it in about a quarter to a third of the length. Alright, now we can take our sanding sealer here, and make sure you've got a protected surface there, so if it drips or spills, and it inevitably does, it won't get all over your work surface. Here you can use a small paintbrush, or I'm using a cotton applicator. Either one will work. And we're just going to put a smooth layer here all over the wood. Try to avoid getting it on the root edge, and you may even want to leave just a little bit of an edge there on the sides before the root edge, and that will be the area where your fillets will be attaching, because for the glue to attach, it actually prefers a coarse grain rather than a fine one that we're producing here. Alright, and if you do happen to get the sanding sealer down in that area, you can sand it off later. Alright, and then once you've got it all fully covered, this is where the pin and the corrugated cardboard come in, is you can just slide this into one of the corrugations and let it dry. Now, I can see I've got some excess on there, and so we can kind of squeegee that off. I'm going to use the handle of one of these applicators. So if you have excess, go ahead and remove it. That way it doesn't just drip, because then you have to sand the drips off. and then we'll go ahead and put that up there, and it can dry, and you can go ahead and work on the next one. I'll do the other two off camera and then come back when I'm done. While the sanding sealer is drying, we'll go ahead now and come back to the motor mount. And the first thing we're going to do is simply use this red ring as a guide. And so I'm just going to place it, both of them here on the table, and then make a pencil mark where the red ring comes up against the tube here. Okay, and then we'll take a hobby knife and cut a slit there. It's about 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch long. Alright, and this will be for the clip here, so you can just take the right angled end of the clip and pop that in there to make sure it fits. Alright, now we're going to take just some tape here, and you can just use some cellophane tape or clear tape for this. And this is going to go around the middle of the tube here, and it's just going to hold that clip in place. And you can adjust it as necessary. Alright, next we're going to take the red ring, which is actually our thrust ring, and this is going to be glued right there flush with the end, and it'll rest up against where the clip is showing through there. Now, most of the time when you're doing these types of things, you put the glue in the tube, and then whatever's going to go in forces that glue forward. Because of that, I don't like to do that with engine rings. Or engine block rings here, because I don't want the excess glue to get forced down into the tube where it might interfere with the proper placement of the motor. Okay, so instead I'm going to put a bead of glue on the outside of my ring. Okay, and then when I put this in, any excess glue will be forced to the outside, and we can simply wipe it off here. Alright, I'm going to let that dry for a few minutes before we go on to our next step. A few minutes have passed, and now I'm going to mark the engine tube here from each end at 1/2 inch, and this is where our centering rings will go. Okay, so one there, and 1/2 inch from that side. Okay, there's no difference here between the two of them. So first, just dry fit these on to make sure they're going to go. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing with this one, but the forward one I'm going to take back off again in just a moment. I just want to make sure it's going to go. It's really tight. Alright, and something I'm going to do with it here is I'm going to cut a notch on the inside of it here. Not too deep, but just enough for the Kevlar shock cord to go through. Alright, now this isn't shown in the instructions, they just have it kind of wiggle under the ring there. Okay, so with this one, I've got it a little bit past my 1/2 inch line there. And so now I'm going to go ahead and put in a bead of glue here. Okay, I'm going to try to avoid getting it on the clip. Now, as I've moved this around, that clip has moved a little bit. And now I'm going to push this forward into the glue until I get my line back. There it is. Alright. And so now just adjust everything so that the ring is perpendicular. Straighten out my clip there a little bit. And now once I've got that, I'm just going to form a fillet all the way around. Okay, and then if you want, you can put another fillet on the inside edge here. That was messy. Alright, and I'm going to let that one dry for a few minutes, just enough so that it holds in place. Next we're going to attach the shock cord. So here once again we have our Kevlar that's now in a big loop. Alright, and we're going to use that loop like a slip knot. So just grab onto the loop here, and then we're going to take the entire shock cord, pass it through the loop, and then pull that down. Okay, and that's going to give us a nice firm anchoring point. Alright, now this is the reason I cut the notch in here. So I'm also going to pass the whole shock cord through that ring and up here again. Okay, and now I'm just going to move this around so that the Kevlar goes through there. Now once again we're going to move this down to our 1/2 inch mark. Yep, there it is. Okay, now the instructions actually show the Kevlar staying down here, but they're not showing that it's being glued or otherwise put in place. What I prefer to do with these types of mounts is actually bring it all the way up like this and then embed it in a ring of glue. Okay, and then we'll just go ahead and smooth that all the way around. Okay, and then just kind of keep that a little bit taut there. And then once again we can do the same thing on the forward side. My glue bottle's getting a little empty there. And then just smooth this all the way around. Like that. Okay, and once again we're going to have to wait for that glue to dry, and then we'll come back. The glue on my motor mount has dried, and so we're ready to put it into the body tube. Now I'm going to do this a little bit differently than what the instructions show here. Okay, so first of all I'm going to take my shock cord and pass it down through the motor mount here so that it comes out the aft end. I'm just going to go ahead and pull that all the way through, and this will just keep it out of the way so we don't accidentally get it into the glue like it shows it could here. The other thing I'm going to do is put the first ring of glue further up inside here. And to do this, it's best to use a cotton applicator. Okay. And what I'm going to do first of all is just measure roughly the distance between the two centering rings. Now I'm going to use that distance to apply the glue on the inside there. Okay, so I'm going to get myself some more wood glue going. And once again, I'm going to measure this, so about that far. Okay, and now I'm going to stick the applicator up until my thumbnail hits, and then I'm going to bring it up against the inside there and smear the glue around. Looks like we need a little more. Okay, now I'm going to insert this just part way. Actually, before I go any farther, it's actually a good idea to dry fit this first. I'm going to run this up the other end just to make sure that we're not going to have a problem. Yep, it's going to fit. That's all I needed to know. So do that before you put the glue in. Alright, so I'm going to get some more glue ready here. And once more, I'm going to slide this in, but not into that ring of glue yet. And then I'm going to put another ring of glue right around the edge here. And this way, each ring will have its own glue instead of trying to shove both rings through a single bead of glue, which is going to make the aft ring a lot weaker. All right, now we're going to quickly just push this all in, and we want to leave about 1/4 of an inch of the motor tube hanging out there. All right, and you do want to do this in one quick motion, otherwise the glue will tend to grab. And then once that is in, you can go ahead and apply a fillet here to the inside and further strengthen that connection. Alright, then I'm just going to take my little finger there, form fillets all the way around, kind of smooth this out. And now once again, we'll let that dry. While the centering ring glue is drying and the motor mount's being installed, my fins are dry now. The sanding sealer has dried on them. And so now we're just going to give these a light sanding with the 220 grit sandpaper. Now I will warn you, this does tend to clog up sandpaper, so you may want to cut an extra sheet or two. But just go through and sand down whatever's raised up, and then the valleys of the wood grain will remain filled with the sanding sealer. And you can repeat this process as many times as you like, depending on how smooth you need your fins to be. I usually only do it once or twice, in part because I tend to use a sandable filling primer as well, and it also helps to fill the wood grain. Alright, well, we're just sanding these just like we did before. And here I do want to make sure that I didn't get any on the root edge, and it doesn't look like I did. Okay, and then we'll just do this for all the rest of the fins here very quickly. Okay, so at this point you can either add another layer of sanding sealer and re-sand it and just keep doing this till you've got them the way you want to. As I said, I'm just going to leave that with the one coat there and depend more on my primer and paint to finish filling in the wood grain. The glue on the motor mount is still drying, but it is to the point where we can continue working with it. So next we're going to cut out the fin marking guide here. And I just wanted to make sure there's nothing important on the other side. If you don't want to cut up your instructions, just make a photocopy of this page and cut out the photocopy. Alright, and then you're going to want to have just a little piece of masking tape handy. We're going to wrap this around the aft end here, and theoretically this should line up. Okay, and I'm just going to take a little bit of masking tape here and not only cover the seam but allow it to overlap onto the body tube a little bit so it doesn't roll on us. Okay, and so now we're just going to mark on either side of these arrows with a pencil. Okay, and then we can just go ahead and peel that back off and set it aside. And now the instructions call for using a door frame to mark the lines here. Or you can use a tube marking guide like this one from Estes. This one allows me to actually do this under the camera, which is a bit more difficult when you're trying to use a door frame. Okay, so here we're just going to draw some lines about 1/3 of the way up. Okay, I like to go a little bit farther than the actual fin length is, so there's our fin. It just gives me more to align it with. Now do these for each. Alright, now I'm also going to check on the launch lug. Let's see here. Okay, so they have us just kind of measure halfway in between two of the lines here and then put a line in for the launch lug. So if you want to make this a little more accurate, you can use a flexible tape like you would find in a sewing area. Alright, so you can just measure that's going to be 5.5, so about 2.7, 2.8. Oops, nope, that would be over here. Here we go. Okay, so that should be pretty close to halfway. My eraser came undone there. Alright, so for this I'm going to go ahead and draw the line all the way down the body tube. And I do this again for ease of alignment. Alright, it gives me something to sight against to make sure that it's straight. Okay, and then it needs to go 2 3/4 inches from the aft end. So we'll go ahead and measure that. So there's 2 3/4 right there. That's where the aft end of the launch lug will end up. Now if we take the launch lug itself go. Alright, and we'll just use that as a guide and make another little mark here where it ends. And now what I'm going to do is just take some sandpaper. You can use 100 or 150 grit for this. And I'm just going to roughen up the tube a little bit, any place where the glue is going to be. Alright, so for my launch lug area, I'm just going to go down the line a little bit. And this only requires a couple of strokes. All we're doing is taking off the gloss there and giving a better surface for the glue. Alright, if we take a fin here, we can use it as a guide as well. Let's make sure we're on a fin line. There we go. Alright, so just give a little quick mark. And then do the same thing. So here, just like that. Alright, now we're ready to attach the fins, and once again we'll use wood glue for this. And I use a version similar to what they have in the instructions, though just a little bit different. And I'll show you here. So what we're going to do is just take a fin to begin with here. Pick a fin, any fin. And we're going to put on a thin but even bead of glue here. Gonna smooth that out with a finger. Alright, and it's a good idea to have some tissue or paper towel or a rag or something here. Alright, now we're going to go from the aft end of the tube along our line. I'm going to press that down and I'm going to pop that back off. And I'm going to allow this to get tacky for about 30 seconds to a minute. Now in the instructions they use a similar method, but they allow this to completely dry, and I don't like to do that. And then what they do is put another thin film of glue over the glue. Okay, I would prefer the glue to actually be attaching to the roughened surface of the tube and my fin here. Now whether one version is better than the other, I don't know. Okay, so probably been talking about 30 seconds or so here, so we'll try this. Alright, so now we just put it right back on. Alright, you notice now I can move about. Now for one thing, that is crooked. Okay, so I'm just going to move it over a little bit. Okay, and now we're going to sight down the length as well as straight down. Okay, so this should be perpendicular to the tube, and then the edges should be parallel. Alright, and we will let that dry for about 5 to 10 minutes, and then I'll repeat the process for the other two fins off camera. My fins are currently all on. The glue is still drying on them. But we can do one more thing here. I'm just going to move this over gently. And we can go ahead and put the launch lug on as well. And so here I'm going to sand a strip down the launch lug in a way similar to what I did with the fins. And now we'll put a bead of wood glue on that as well. Now for this one I'm not going to put it on the rocket and pull it back off. I'll just place it on there because it doesn't weigh very much. But like with the fins, we want a nice even bead here. In any of these, if you have more glue, it actually takes a lot longer to dry, and you're going to be more likely to have slippage problems where it will get out of alignment. Alright, so now I'm going to treat this kind of like a gun sight and just sight down the line, the tube, and the launch lug all at once, and everything should be in line. Okay, and now we're going to let all of this dry for at least an hour, maybe longer, until it's completely dry, and then we will put on the fillets. The glue on my fins and fillets is dry, and so now we're ready to put the fillets on. I'm just going to get myself a few tissues here to wipe up glue with. And here again you can use white glue or wood glue. I'm going to use a wood glue here, different brand than what I've been using just because I'm running out of the other one. Alright, so I like to do facing fins at the same time, so I'm just going to run a bead of glue here and one on the other side. Okay, and then as soon as we get those on, we'll just take a finger to smooth in the glue there. Alright, and then just do the same thing all the way around. Okay, now if you want thicker fillets, it's a better idea to let these dry and then add to them rather than trying to get a great big thick layer of glue on there in one pass, because most likely it's going to run or glob or make bubbles or something, and it's just not going to turn out well. Alright, this can be drying now on its side, so we want to keep it level and horizontal here so that they don't run. And then once those are dry, we can touch them up as necessary and then get this ready for priming and painting. While I'm waiting for the fillets to dry, I'm going to turn my attention to the nose cone here. Now this was molded in two pieces, and so you can see a seam here that goes up both sides. It's not very prominent on mine, and so you have the option of just ignoring this completely and leaving it alone. But if you do want to do something about the seam there, we've got a few things that we can try. The obvious one is to sand it. And so for that, I would start with some 150 grit sandpaper here and just get the seam. And this is just to knock down any ridges. Now there are also some valleys to this seam, and this won't do as much for them. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. All right, it's definitely duller now that I've done that, but it's knocked down the ridges. Now for the valleys here, some additional sanding will tend to level that out with the surrounding plastic there. If you really want to get that as smooth as possible, you can use something like this. This is a plastic model contour putty, and what you can do is just smear this in with a finger here, let it dry and sand it, and then repeat as necessary. I don't think mine really needs it that much, so I'm going to skip that step. And now I'm going to take this over to a sink where I can wet sand it with 220 grit sandpaper, and that'll take out most of the rest of this. And then I'll move up to 320 and 400 grit sandpaper. Unfortunately, I don't have this rig set up where I can put it over my sink very easily. So I'll go do that and then come back. Here's my nose cone, and what I've done now is sanded the seams here with 220 grit wet sandpaper. And you can just see a little faint bit of one here. It's a little bit deep. I'm not going to worry about it. After I got the seams sanded down, then I did the entire nose cone with 220 and then worked my way through 320 and 420. And this gives us a nice smooth finish, but it's not glossy, and that will help the paint adhere as well. So now I'm going to mask off the shoulder and take this over and give it a shot of white primer followed by some silver paint. My fillets are all dry, and we'll just do an inspection here quickly. So the fins all look good. Now we do have some bubbles here that formed in the fillets of the launch lug, and depending on your level of aesthetic you can ignore it because it'll definitely be strong enough. You can add more glue to it, or you can add the plastic model putty that I referred to earlier, and I'm going to do that one. So this stuff is kind of water and alcohol based, and we can just squeeze it in there. Now this is really only for filling, it's not strong, so you don't want to use this in place of your regular glue fillets. Alright, now once you've got that there, you can either use a finger or a popsicle stick or something to smooth it out. I'm going to use the popsicle stick here, at least initially. And you do have to work it fairly quickly because it starts drying almost immediately. And you can also smooth it with your finger. Moisten it with a little bit of alcohol or water. And that one's already gone so dry there. I just use my finger to remove the excess putty. All right. This needs to dry usually about an hour, and then after that you can sand it very easily with light sandpaper. The modeling putty has dried, and so now I'm just going to take some 220 grit sandpaper and smooth that in. Alright, now for the little corners and such here, if you want, you can use a file to kind of shape those. You can also use an emery board for this. Alright, we'll give it a little more sanding. Okay, now if you want, you can go ahead and put another layer of the filler in here, especially if you got like a little gap there, things like that. You can also just sand this inward some more. Sometimes you can use a wetted finger and kind of smooth that in, because it is water soluble yet. I'm actually using alcohol just because it evaporates faster. But this can help smooth in some of the smaller imperfections. Alright, so I'm going to let that dry again. And I think I'm just going to rely on my primer to fill in the rest of those little gaps there. You can also just put on another layer on that. You can also use wood filler to do this. Again, this is not for strength, this is for aesthetics and aerodynamics. Some people like to use epoxy as well, so it's kind of up to you. Like I said, if your glue fillet was good enough, I would just go with that. So as soon as this dries, I'm going to go and start the priming and painting process off camera. Here's the rocket after several coats of the filling sandable primer. I will now sand this off camera with some 400 grit sandpaper just to smooth things out. And you can wet sand this as long as you're very careful not to get water into the cardboard itself. And then after sanding, you can put on more of this primer and keep filling it in. I'm going to stop at this point because a little bit of grain doesn't bother me. And then I'm going to go on with the painting scheme that's in the instructions. So they have a silver nose cone, which I've actually got done. All right, so it's all painted already here. And then we'll have a flat green or olive color here. They call it a camouflage green. That'll go on this. Now I may end up having to change that a little bit, because something I found is that flat paints don't accept stick-on decals very well. Okay, so I may go with a little bit, glossier, or at least a matte paint instead of a flat one. I'll have to see what I have here in the shop. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and sand this and then find the right color, and I will paint this and come back. Here's the rocket, and it just received its third coat of paint, and the overall kind of texture to it may be smooth enough that the decals won't have a problem. But this needs to dry for 24 hours before we put the decals on. While I'm waiting for the paint to dry, I'm going to do a little bit of work on the streamer here. So as I mentioned earlier, in the instructions, the streamer is just tied on to the shock cord, and you can do that just fine. But I want to be able to remove this, mainly because this is kind of right on the cusp of whether you want to use a parachute or a streamer, and so I'd like to have the option of easily changing those out. So I'm going to take a snap swivel here, and the size of the swivel doesn't matter a whole lot as long as the snap portion is big enough to go over the eyelet on the nose cone here without binding. Okay, so with that closed, it can still move freely, and that's what we're looking for. To connect this, we just need a short piece of string. Now, I've got a piece of Kevlar line here just because I have it sitting around. You could use nylon or even cotton string for this, like you would use for parachute shroud lines. And all we're going to do here is run that through the streamer and through the swivel side of the snap swivel. And then I'm just going to tie a knot in both ends here to form a loop. Okay, and move the knot fairly close to the free end so we don't have a whole lot there. And then just to keep that from moving on us, I'm going to add a little bit of super glue. Okay, I'm going to put a little drop right on the knot there, and then a little out here to keep these from fraying. I'm going to cut most of that off in just a moment. Alright, and then just to accelerate this, I'm going to add a little alcohol to it. In case you didn't know, the super glue accelerator you can buy for seemingly a large amount of money is usually just alcohol. Alright, and then we'll come in here and just cut back most of that frayed stuff. And what's left here will harden, if it's not already. Okay, so when we want streamer recovery, we can simply attach this as would be normal. And then if you want to use a parachute, you can unclip this, put your parachute back on there, fly it that way, and then if you decide that no, the parachute wasn't needed, you can go back to the streamer, however you like it. Okay, this just gives you a little bit of an option, and all it costs you is a piece of string and a snap swivel. The paint on my body tube is dry, and so we are ready to put on the decals. Now, these are just peel and stick, and I just noticed here that the Grunt decal still has the Quest logo on it, so kind of left over from the switch over to the mid-power Enerjet line. Now, you can either just peel these off and stick them on directly, or if you want to be able to move them a bit, in case you put them on wrong, then you can use this soapy water method, where I've just got some room temperature water. It has a single drop of dishwashing liquid in it. And this temporarily decreases the stickiness of the adhesive on the decal. So I'm going to start with the main one here, if I can get it to peel. Okay, so just lift this up. Now you do want to make sure you wash your hands well so you have fewer fingerprints on this. Alright, now I'm just going to dip it in the water. Remove the excess there. And then this can simply be placed on wherever you want it. So I'm doing it on the fin that's the opposite to the launch lug. Okay, and now I can check this for straightness, and if I like it, I can put it down. So just start pressing from the middle outward. But at this point, if I need to, I can still reposition it. Now, if you're using this technique on other models, the one thing you don't want to do is put this on a non-painted surface or a pre-colored surface. So, you know, if you've got a model rocket that comes pre-colored, that surface coloration is not waterproof. And the same thing if you're doing this without a painted rocket on a bare rocket, you don't want to use this either. So don't use this on bare, untreated cardboard. Alright, once you've got this in place, go ahead and just take a rag or a tissue here. It got caught underneath a little bit. Okay, and squish out the water and air, moving from the middle toward the edges there. And after this completely dries, which can take several days, you'll have a nicely adhered decal there. Alright, and then we've got the stars. Going by the packaging, these go 1 per fin. And here again, you can use the water method or just peel them off and stick them on. And then finally we have the little bullet holes. And according to the package or the instructions here, if you want to take a look, these they kind of arrange over one part of the rocket. Okay, so here they show 4 bullet holes kind of going from the fin and up and around there. You can put them wherever you like. So I'm going to come back to my main view there. And these ones I'm just going to put on without going through the water method here. Now, because of the difference in the glossiness of the paint versus the decals, you might want to use a clear coat on this, probably a matte clear coat. If you do decide to do that, give these at least 48 hours to dry. If you're not using the water method, you can do it almost immediately. we've got this last one here. This is just a row of dots, probably meant to look like rivets or screws. And this is shown being put on the nose cone. So this should wrap around the base of the nose cone there. This one I am going to use the water with, just because it is a long decal. And it's wrapping around the whole nose cone, so we may have to pull it up and replace it a couple of times. And here I'm pulling a little bit of tension on it as I go around. Now this silver paint really likes to lift, so you want to be careful that you don't move this around any more than necessary. Okay, I'm going to call that close enough. Alright, so that's all of our decals. I'm going to take this basin away, and when I come back we'll do the final assembly. Alright, our last thing to do is to attach the shock cord and streamer to the nose cone. Now if you're going to do this according to the instructions, you're going to want about 3 inches or so, about 7.5 to 8 centimeters of free end on here. So we're going to tie a double knot to link this to it. Okay. Now I'm not going to do it that way because I'm using the snap swivel we did earlier. All right, but if you do want to use their method, go ahead and tie a double knot and leave a goodly amount out here. And then once you've got that knot in, instead of using the snap swivel that I did, they just passed this free end through the hole here and then tie a knot in the end of it to keep it from coming off. Okay, so on mine, since I am using the snap swivel, I don't need that big of a free end, but I will still tie a double knot or 2 half hitches in this. Okay, make sure it's good and tight from all directions there. And I'm going to add just a little dab of white glue or wood glue, or in my case, white wood glue. Okay, and just put that directly on the knot. You don't need a lot. And just kind of work that in there, and that'll just keep that knot from coming undone. And then I'm going to cut that free end back to about 5 millimeters or 1/4 of an inch so that it's less likely to interfere and get caught between the shoulder and the body tube here. Alright, and then my last attachment is my streamer, and I'm just going to use my snap swivel here just to clip that in. Just like that. Make sure we close it up. My bifocals aren't working right. There we go. Okay. And then to prep this for launch, you'll add probably 4 to 5 pieces of recovery wadding to that, loosely crumpled. And then I like to just fold my streamer up, and this is how it came. Okay, just keep folding it lengthwise over end, and then once you got to the very end of it, you can roll up the rest there. Alright, and then we're simply going to drop in the shock cord. So nothing fancy here, we just stuff it down. follow that with the streamer. And then place the nose cone on. Now again, we'll make sure that none of this stuff is getting between the nose cone shoulder and the body tube there. Okay, now that felt pretty loose, so we do a shake test here, it's going to come out. So to fix that, we're just going to add some masking tape around the circumference of our nose cone shoulder. And you don't necessarily have to go all the way around. It just depends on how much friction you need there. Alright, that seems to be just enough. Yep, okay. So, there is my Lil Grunt. Hope you had fun building this with me. Have a great launch and a safe recovery, and please stay tuned for more of my videos.